Mad Men, aired on AMC from 2007 to 2015, is a period drama set in the United States in the 1960s. Showrunner Matthew Weiner got his start in television as a staff writer on Becker, an inexplicable show in retrospect, where Ted Danson played a cranky doctor who spent most of his spare time in a diner. Weiner parlayed that gig into a 3-year run writing for The Sopranos. As soon as that was done, he created Mad Men.
There's a shot of the ceiling with the fly trapped in the light. And that's been analyzed as like, well, Don has this creative problem and he's like a fly trapped in a light. That's not what I wanted. I wanted to say was, there's no period here. We still live in those drop ceilings. The lights look exactly like that. And a fly is not from 1960. It's just a fly.
It's always tempting to look at whatever you're experiencing today and conclude that your experience, your reality, is more, sophisticated, stressful, challenging, whatever, than all the stuff the previous generation went through. And there is some logic to that. Human existence is predicated on accumulated knowledge, so, ostensibly, as time marches forward, the metaphorical hurdles in our lives should get shorter and shorter. Shared knowledge should be the savior of us all. In reality, things are rarely that simple.
It's a tournament of Magic today at Motel California. Magic the Gathering, the strategic card game where two players duel against each other by using their cards to cast spells and summon creatures. Today we've brought together some of the best players from the Pro Tour 4, the MTV Invitational, presented by Magic the Gathering.
Take it over.
That's it. Justice got him on the run now.
Who's he?
That's Mark Justice. He just got back from that $1 million Magic Pro Tour out in Paris.
Over here.
Who's that guy with the bandana?
That's the Hammer, ex-arm wrestler. #1 wild man on the circuit and East Coast Magic phenom.
Can't have that out here, Mark.
When he's on the left coast, Hammer usually tears up the cards competition in Long Beach.
Do they play a lot there?
They have fun. We'll take no prisoners. I play there occasionally. I can show you the ropes sometime.
Get it out of here.
You're lucky man, Hammer. Congratulations.
Better luck next time, Justice. Yes!
Maybe I'll drop by, but maybe I can get Hammer to show me the ropes.
Magic the Gathering. Like the magic of life, you can't win if you don't play.
Cool.
In case you weren't around in the 90s, don't worry about it. You didn't miss much. Everything pretty much looked like that. Magic the Gathering's Pro Tour officially kicked off in 1996, but it wasn't until the third season of the Pro Tour that the ball really started rolling. Here's what I mean by that. These are the top 20 players across the first 2 seasons of the Pro Tour, charted by the pro points they earned in that time. Players who made it to the Hall of Fame are in gold. Now here's the same chart but across the 3rd and 4th seasons of the Pro Tour. Despite all the equity Jon Finkel sucked out of the ecosystem in that time, this span contains 8 Hall of Famers, more than double the Hall of Famers the first 2 seasons produced. And it's not as though the first 2 seasons didn't produce any dominant players. Chris Pikula, Jakob Slemmer, and Gabe Sang each have 3 Pro Tour top 8s, with the latter 2 converting one of their top 8s into a win, but their Hall of Fame cases are pretty borderline. One guy here whose case isn't borderline is Scott Johns, who top 8'd 3 Pro Tours in a row. The only other player to accomplish that feat is Luis Scott Vargas. Johns also has 5 total Pro Tour top 8s, including a win. Okay, so this is every player who has at least 5 Pro Tour top 8s and at least 1 Pro Tour win. The only other player here that isn't in the Hall of Fame is Tomohiro Saito, because he cheated. But Scott Johns never cheated. If I had to guess why this era's highest performers went overlooked during Hall of Fame voting, a lot of it boils down to the fact that Magic in those days is almost unrecognizable in contrast to today's game. They were still printing anti-cards, for God's sakes. So, sure, I can see how it would be kinda easy to dismiss those players' accomplishments. But again, the 3rd season of the Pro Tour was when Wizards of the Coast kicked things into high gear. Starting in 1998, Magic the Gathering was actually broadcast on ESPN2. Did the game get a good time slot? Well, no. But we were on fucking ESPN2. That's crazy. In hindsight, it's unfathomable that that actually happened, that Wizards of the Coast was willing to back their flagship product as an intellectual sport to that degree. But these are the pre-Hasbro days, and there aren't too many of those left. 1998 also marked the first season where Grand Prix, two-day events that players didn't need to qualify for, paid out not only in cash but in pro points, which is a total game changer once you factor in the Player of the Year race. This scatterplot doesn't necessarily show the strongest correlation between playing in GPs and getting a lot of pro points, but then again, it's probably not a coincidence that these three outliers just so happen to occupy the top 3 slots of the Player of the Year race at season's end. The 97-98 season began in Toronto, with future Hall of Famer Brian Kibler winning the Mirage block constructed tournament with a mono blue deck based on Fidalian Illusionist, phasing out all your own stuff. Because back then, enters the battlefield effects triggered when a creature phased in. So, sure, there were the old activate my serrated Biscalian and in response phase it out tricks, but the next level, phasing out your own Mana War only to have it hit the following turn and bounce something again, was really tough for decks to overcome. Before the dust had even settled on the tournament, the top players at the Grand Prix came to an easy consensus that the mono blue deck was the best deck in the format. All we have for GP Copenhagen is the top 8 finishers, so we move into the first Pro Tour of the season, Pro Tour Chicago. Looking at the top 8, there are some familiar names. Perennial Magic Online draft trophy leader Kyle Rose currently streams on Twitch. This is David Mills' second Pro Tour runner-up finish, and the first time he lost a Pro Tour Finals legitimately, and not because of some bullshit judge ruling. The top 8 features 3 future Hall of Famers, but the story of Pro Tour Chicago centers around one man in particular, the tournament's first place finisher, Randy Buehler. The Pro Tour Chicago format was extended, which at the time stretched all the way back to the dark, but also included the original cycle of dual lands, because why the hell not? The ban list was a hodgepodge of early design mistakes and also Hypnotic Spectre. Want to see the 3-mana black card that stayed legal? The choice to ban Hippie over Necropotence is baffling. It's not even a hindsight's 2020 situation, it's just a really dumb choice. Why they chose to keep Necropotence around, let alone reprint it in 5th edition, is anyone's guess. Coming into the Pro Tour, the extended format had 3 pillars. Obviously, the first one was Necropotence, which we've already covered, so let's hit on the rest. Keldoran Outpost allowed a deck to play passively, addressing threats with counter magic or spot removal. David Mills' runner-up deck serves as a fine proof of concept for how a deck like this is constructed. Lots of answers, a couple annoying threats, and once an opponent had been completely exhausted of resources, the low opportunity cost of Keldoran Outpost slowly whittled away an opponent's life total with a steady, glacial stream of 1/1s. The third pillar of Weatherlight Extended was Winter Orb. Winter Orb is a 2-mana artifact that's legal in Commander, yet is only played in 1% of decks, according to EDHREC. That's because Winter Orb is bullshit. In a way, it's kind of a hallmark of early Magic, especially at the competitive level. They literally printed cards that said, hey, if you don't want to play Magic, you don't have to. Winter Orb effectively locks opponents out of the game, and if you pair it with Icy Manipulator, like John Finkel did in his plotting 4-color You're Not Playing Magic Anymore deck, you can tap your Winter Orb on your opponent's end step to untap all of your lands and ensure your opponent's lands stay tapped down. Finkel complemented his Winter Orb Armageddon strategy with Artifact mana, as seen in Diamond's Marble and Sky. His deck contains 2 distinct ways to close games. Connect 10 times with an animated Mishra's Factory, or loop 2 Gaia's Blessings till your opponent decks out. Trolling at its finest. By the way, you could have probably already guessed this, but we'll be seeing more from this kid very soon. But for now, all eyes are on Randy Buehler, who, in his very first Pro Tour, piloted his Necro deck all the way to what was, at the time, a massive upset, putting Team CMU on the map in the process. Team CMU is a group of players from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, who played Magic at Carnegie Mellon University and mostly went on to work at Wizards of the Coast. Randy was director of Magic R&D for more than 4 years, succeeded by fellow CMUer Aaron Forsyth, who is now VP of Design. Mike Turian's been at WotC for almost 20 years, spending the last 5 as a product designer. Brian Schneider was a developer for 17 sets and was the lead developer on 5 of them. Paul Sotosanti was a designer at Wizards of the Coast for 5 years and parlayed that into working for EA and Riot. Then there's Eric Lauer. Eric Lauer is currently the lead developer of Magic and has been at Wizards of the Coast since 2007, and his impact on Magic is immeasurable. But right now, it's 1997, and a deck he designed just won a Pro Tour. Eric Lauer is going to come up a lot throughout this series because he simply sees Magic in a way most people do not, which makes him really, really good at building decks. Even among the best the game had to offer, Lauer stood out. His innovation for Pro Tour Chicago was to add Firestorm to Necropotence, which in hindsight seems totally obvious, but at the time of the Pro Tour, Weatherlight had only been on store shelves for 4 months. Somehow, Eric Lauer was the only guy in the room who thought to combine Firestorm and Necropotence. He was also a big proponent of playing the full 4 copies of Demonic Consultation, which early Magic players feared like Adam feared the apple. But thanks to Eric Lauer, Randy Buehler was armed with 4 of them. The only reference point we have for what a typical Necropotence deck might have looked like is Adrian Sayers' top 8 list. Looking at the mana curves for the 2 decks, we see some subtle but important differences. Both players ran 4 3-drops, 4 copies of Necropotence, but Buehler's curve is higher at the top ends and pretty much flat after that, save for a lone copy of Ice and Shade. The truly good players were starting to separate themselves from the pack with their deck building and their play. And no one separated themselves from their peers more than Johnny Magic himself, Jon Finkel. You might know Jon from the Magic card that shares his likeness, or his date with a Gizmodo writer, or the book that was written about him, or from Alta Fox's bid to install him as a member of Hasbro's board of directors. But this season marks the start of a Magic career that would get him into the Hall of Fame 3 times over. Any retrospective on competitive Magic is going to have his name plastered all over it, just as a matter of course. We already mentioned how he almost lapped the field in pro points earned over seasons 3 and 4. Here he is again near the top of this chart of Hall of Famers, and spoilers, here he is again, Season 3's Player of the Year. Pro Tour Chicago was a coming out party of sorts for Finkel, the first of his 16 Pro Tour top 8s, which is more Pro Tour top 8s than any other player that has ever lived. We're going to have plenty of time to discuss Jon Finkel's exploits in competitive Magic, but for now, we're moving on to Grand Prix Como, which was Vision's 5th edition limited and has no coverage other than the top 32 standings. Rob Swarovski won Grand Prix San Francisco with a prototypical aggressive mono-red deck, showing off the power of some of those Tempest newcomers in the process. Onward to Pro Tour Mainz, it was played in a castle. The format was Tempest Rochester Draft, and if you haven't been playing Magic for 30 years, nothing about that sequence of words makes any sense, so let's unpack it. First, Tempest. At the time, Tempest was the most recent set, and it carries the distinction of being the first set to feature a lead designer by the name of Mark Rosewater. Just like any retrospective on competitive Magic will invariably feature Jon Finkel at some point, you can't really talk about Magic at all without talking about Mark Rosewater. Rosewater, or Morrow for short, took the ultra-rare Roseanne Writer to Magic Designer pipeline, in so doing becoming the public face of Wizards of the Coast. To date, he has contributed to the design of 85 sets, assuming the role of lead designer on more than 30 of them, including a time where he was both lead and sole designer on a set. That turned out to be a disaster for reasons that aren't really Morrow's fault, but that's a conversation for another time. Right now we're talking about Tempest. At the time, Morrow was a card developer, not a card designer, but he knew in his heart of hearts that he was a designer. So he convinced WotC Brass to give him the design reins on Tempest by pulling Magic's creator, Richard Garfield, out of retirement. WotC figured, hey, if Richard Garfield's working on the set, how bad can the kid really screw it up? And so, Morrow was installed as Tempest's lead designer. His team holed up at Richard Garfield's parents' place in Portland, grew their beards out, and the result was one of the most compelling sets in Magic's history. In Rochester Draft, there's still 8 drafters, but you open the packs one at a time, face up. The player who opened the pack gets to pick first, then picks go clockwise around the table till it gets to the 8th player, known colloquially as the wheel, who gets to take 2 cards. Then picks resume, going counterclockwise from the wheel till the pack's all gone. Repeat 23 more times. Because everything's face up, part of the fun of Rochester Draft is that you can screw whoever you want, as experienced repeatedly by future Hall of Famer Darwin Castle. Strictly speaking, this isn't a great strategy since hate drafting results in 1 less card for your deck, especially early on in the pack, but drafting was still new enough that people didn't really know what they were doing, and so they let fear take the wheel. They don't do Rochester Drafts anymore for a lot of reasons, the primary one being that drafting 24 packs, one at a time, takes forever. Tempest hit at a time where set mechanics were internally competitive. Here's what that means. The 2 mechanics featured in Tempest were Shadow and Buyback. The way they chose to implement Shadow, a form of evasion, was to make it aggressive and stick it on cheap creatures as opposed to expensive ones. Buyback, on the other hand, is more controlling. By virtue of its inflated mana cost, realizing the inherent card advantage of Buyback takes a long time to get to. Mechanics that take all the tension out of your draw step are pretty lame, and Buyback certainly counts as one of those, especially how it's executed, not just in Tempest, but throughout the block. The point is that Shadow and Buyback, as implemented here, don't play with each other. They're at odds with each other. One implementation wants to close the game quickly, while the other seeks to drag the game out in order to realize the incremental value of a repeatable spell over multiple turns. They don't really design sets like this anymore. In reading over tournament reports from Pro Tour mains, the common theme among all of them is that all players had to be hyper aware of how many copies of one particular common were opened in each draft. If you were there, you surely remember the card. If you weren't there, you'll never believe that this was a common. It's hard to figure out what Rolling Thunder's balanced around. The previous fall expansion, Mirage, featured Kervex Torch at common, Volcanic Geyser at uncommon, and Torrent of Lava at rare. Apparently unsatisfied with how badly such a density of X spells warped Mirage's limited format around red, Tempest featured Rolling Thunder, a card plainly better than Torch, Geyser, or even Fireball, at common. Yeah, Rolling Thunder has one more red pip in its mana cost than Fireball or Torch do, and it isn't an instant like Volcanic Geyser. I'm here to tell you that none of that matters, because Rolling Thunder is effectively a one-sided board sweeper. Despite a greater base mana value than Fireball, Rolling Thunder doesn't charge you for having multiple targets, and it lets you distribute the damage however you want instead of divvying it up evenly. It was a really good uncommon in battle for Zendikar, but at common, it is inexplicable. It's astonishing that anyone was even willing to engage with Magic at this point, let alone enjoy it. But how much has really changed? Magic's exponentially expanding catalog, WotC's inability to create a grokkable organized play structure that anyone cares about, rising product prices. These are all essentially Rolling Thunder at common by a different name. Magic is deeply imperfect, and it always has been. Willfully engaging in a Rochester draft, let alone a Trips Tempest one, is no more or less productive than playing a 2.5-hour long game of Commander. It's all Magic. It's all the same. The champion of Pro Tour mains was Matt Place, who would go on to be a Magic developer and designer, and is currently the co-founder and creative director at Good Luck Games, the studio responsible for Storybook Brawl. What followed Pro Tour mains was a stretch of extended Grand Prix we have basically no coverage of. Future Hall of Famer Steve-O Mahoney Schwartz took home the trophy in Madrid. The very next weekend, he found himself in the finals of another Grand Prix, Grand Prix Rio de Janeiro, only to fall one game short of the back-to-back thanks to his future Team Antarctica teammate John Finkel. Told you that name was going to keep coming up. Another future Hall of Famer, Raphael Levy, won Grand Prix Lyon, while a guy by the name of Philip Davey won Grand Prix Melbourne, which was actually Tempest sealed, not extended, which brings us to the season's midpoint. Pro Tour Los Angeles. Pro Tour Los Angeles was block constructed like Columbus and Paris from the 2 seasons prior. The difference between LA and the first 2 block constructed Pro Tours was that despite Stronghold's release the weekend before, Pro Tour LA was a one-set constructed format, Tempest only. They had never done a one-set constructed tournament before, and they haven't done one since. Dave Price, known during his playing days as the King of Beatdown, played in every Pro Tour, but was never able to do well enough at them to get on the proverbial gravy train. So, he'd go to a Pro Tour, fail to secure a finish that qualified him for the next one, go to a Pro Tour qualifier, win that, rinse, repeat. After bottoming out to start Season 2, Price went on a bit of an upswing, performing well enough in mains to qualify for Los Angeles via Pro Points. We'll get into the deck Dave Price played in a second, but again, I want to reiterate that this tournament was a one-set constructed format. Not only that, but Tempest is one of the weirdest sets of all time. Even for the time, a time where designers pretty much did whatever they wanted, Tempest stands out as truly bizarre, likely owing to the fact that the set was Mark Rosewater's first time working on the design of a set as opposed to its development. Ditto for Mike Elliott. Coming off working on Weatherlight as its lead developer, he too felt his skill set was better suited for design, despite zero design work on his desk in his entire career up to that point. Add in a Richard Garfield who hadn't designed an expansion since Arabian Nights, lock them all in a cabin in the woods for a week, and yeah, there were probably lots of ideas flying around. Like this card. What is going on here? Turns out Mark Rosewater wanted an enchantment that turns all creatures into ley druids, and thanks to Squirrel Nest, Earthcraft is banned in everything. Intuition wasn't even supposed to function the way it does, but everyone else liked how powerful it was, which is actually kind of cool. We printed a powerful card because it's powerful. Tomorrow's point, this kind of non-choice disguised as a choice is pretty lame, but hey, it's powerful. The way this card got its name is probably the most interesting thing about it. These are two of the most messed up enchantments in Magic's history. One's a combo engine that necessitates playing some of the dopiest creatures ever, and the other is a rules nightmare, and those are just the outliers. Nestled down here are some of the weirdest cards you've ever seen. Grindstone, the first of Morrow's many tributes to Millstone, is now an infinite combo with Painter's Servant. This card's busted despite Morrow not realizing it at the time. So is this one. Here's whatever this is supposed to be. Here's a card that says skip your next turn on it. And here's a card that says take an extra turn on it. That just serves as a really overt reference to Rocky Horror Picture Show. And if you still didn't get it, don't worry, because here's the flavor text to beat you over the head with it. We're not even scratching the surface here. To discuss all the bizarre and/or groundbreaking designs in Tempest requires time we just don't have. We've got a Pro Tour to unpack. According to Ben Rubin's tournament report, the two known decks were Mono Red and Control decks that featured Bottle Gnomes and Winds of Wrath. Dave Price played the former, and despite all the hostility Tempest could throw at aggressive red decks, it was still a force to be reckoned with. The Mono Red archetype existed since Magic existed, but it had never been the best thing to do. Tempest changed all of that, with enough power left over to support plenty of other archetypes. Living Death was a deck unto itself. Intuition dumped creatures into the graveyard, and Living Death got them all back. There was a mono-white deck with a bunch of shadow creatures. Even Eric Lauer joined the party with a deck they called the Green Machine, which was basically just mono-green slivers. It is wild that one set could support all of this. But that was Tempest. Time for Pro Tour New York, won by, well, you probably already know. Pro Tour New York was Tempest Stronghold Draft. Players drafted 2 packs of Tempest, followed by a lone pack of Stronghold. Players look back fondly on the days they mixed sets and draft formats, but I think it kinda sucks. For starters, it's barely different from drafting Triple Tempest. Sure, your draft strategy and card evaluations for the first 2 packs are going to change, but that structure diminishes the impact of the new set basically as much as possible. Plus, if you're drafting with your friends, having to procure 2 different kinds of product sucks a lot. I'm glad they don't do that anymore. Speaking of stuff they don't do anymore, what the hell? This was an uncommon. Why even do this? What could possibly be better to do with your mana every turn than cast Fireball? The card's good enough, it doesn't even need buyback. Whatever. In what can only be described as the cringiest thing that has ever happened, Pro Tour New York top 8er David Bachman wrote his tournament report as a rap, gleefully describing kicking Finkel's chair out from him in round 12. Bachman is oddly fixated on Finkel, not unlike the famously even-matched rivalry of LeBron James and Deshaun Stevenson, where one guy is the GOAT and the other guy is mad about it. This is not to say that it's fair to judge someone based on how they acted when they were 18. It's more to call attention to the fact that making your own insecurities someone else's problem sucks really badly. Show me someone on the outside looking in who read this and thought, wow, this Pro Tour thing seems pretty sweet, and I will show you a moron. Heading into Worlds, the run towards the Player of the Year title had become a 2-dog race between Randy Buehler and Jon Finkel. Buehler had the edge on Finkel for most of the season, but with his win in New York, Finkel took a commanding lead. Buehler responded by ripping off 3 Grand Prix top 8s, one of which was in Belgium in the span of 4 months. Still, Buehler needed both a top 8 at Worlds and for Finkel to somehow finish outside of the top 128 players. A pretty bad parlay considering Finkel's mean finish in Pro Tours that season was 12th, in order to even entertain the idea of winning the Player of the Year race. No one on Earth was running hotter than these two. Randy Buehler ended up finishing in the top 16 at Worlds, which earned him 8 pro points, 1 point shy of where Finkel sat before Worlds. Jon didn't even need to show up for Worlds, but in staying true to that blistering pace he set this season, he showed up anyway. Even in a season with 5 Pro Tours, 3 top 8s is a lot. 2 top 4s plus a win is basically unheard of, but that's 1998 Jon Finkel for you. Worlds would feature the full Wrath cycle, including Exodus. Apocalypse gets a lot of credit for being the best 3rd set of all time, but don't sleep on Exodus. There is crazy power here up and down the rarities. Soul Warden, Merfolk Looter, Carnophage, Raging Goblin, and Wood Elves all serve as compelling proofs of concept for their respective colors at common and would all go on to inspire dozens of similar cards. Their first printing was an exodus. Culling the Weak is absurdly powerful, while Sonic Burst completely jebaited me, so it goes. Buyback definitely sucks, but it's perhaps least offensive on a Shatter, since if you need to destroy that many artifacts, your opponent's probably up to no good anyway. Speaking of opponents that were up to no good, there was a solid trio of uncommons that punished opponents who were probably getting up to some shenanigans. Also included in the uncommons is a trio of buyback cards that should probably never have buyback on them. Included in the rares is a cycle of Oaths, one of which is far more powerful than the rest and would go on to be a defining card of every format it was legal in, including Vintage. Pandemonium and Seismic Assault supported standard combo decks. I guess technically Mind Over Matter did too, but that one got banned once Urza's Destiny was printed. City of Traders, Sphere of Resistance, and Mana Bond are all Legacy and Vintage staples. Coat of Arms was a watershed moment of design tapping into players' love of tribes. It's not an accident that Coat of Arms appears in the same block as Slivers. Cataclysm is a nice callback to Balance, Spike Weaver is a callback to, Fog. But at least for Worlds 98, these two cards stole the show. Recurring Nightmare and Survival of the Fittest are its own combo, all contained within one set. The power level of both of these cards is off the charts, yet they don't really speak to any of the set's unique mechanics. None of these cards really do, except for maybe Spike Weaver, but whatever. The two standard decks with the most heat on them coming into Worlds were Mono Red and Recurring Nightmare Survival of the Fittest decks, and likewise, occupied 7 of the 8 slots in the top 8. Oh, hey Scott Johns. Most Rexer decks complemented their Recurring Nightmares with Living Death. 18-year-old world champion Brian Selden did not. Back in the day, they used to take 4 decks from every World Championship top 8 and commemorate them in gold border. They weren't tournament legal, and they sold for about $9.99 a piece, which is roughly 99% cheaper than the next time they would release a commemorative product featuring cards that aren't tournament legal, but I digress. I had Brian Selden's deck, and to this day, it is one of my favorite decks. It is awesome. If you've ever played Birthing Pod, Selden's 98 Worlds deck plays similarly. There's so much going on. Every turn is a puzzle. Selden himself had some issues with his list, but his end result makes the deck much harder to argue with. After dispatching Jon Finkel in a grueling 5-game mirror match semifinal, Ben Rubin, runner-up at Pro Tour Los Angeles, found himself in the finals of yet another Pro Tour, armed with a mono-red deck simply named Sly. Sly, named after its originator, Paul Sly, who qualified for a Pro Tour with the deck all the way back in 1996, was a mono-red deck built on the principle of a mana curve, which is itself lifted from the act of plotting the slope of a curve in linear algebra. The idea is that you are most likely to have 1 mana, so the majority of your spells should cost 1 mana, and so on and so forth. In order to adhere to such a principle, deck designers were forced to make some concessions on power level. The classic example of this type of concession is the card Ironclaw Orcs. Obviously, this card is terrible. It's a Grizzly Bears with a drawback. It was terrible back then too, but its drawback was related to blocking, which you weren't planning on doing anyway. The Sly archetype paved the way for almost every red deck that came after it. Between Pro Tour LA and Worlds, the 98 season was its coming out party. Even Randy Buehler applied the principle of a mana curve way back at Pro Tour Chicago, just didn't have a name yet. All of this culminated in a season that astounded everyone. Jon Finkel didn't come out of nowhere, but his absurd margin of victory over the Player of the Year runner-up was unprecedented at the time. No one saw it coming, but then again, no one could have predicted the busted sets and dominant players on the horizon.